Hey guys, so what I want to do in this video is introduce a series that I'm going to do covering all of the forms that you're going to encounter if you're a home seller as you're going through the process of listing your property with a realtor. So I'm going to start with the first form, which is the listing agreement, and then we're going to go through the other forms that you're going to encounter, and I'm actually going to go through each form with you as quickly as possible to try to highlight the key points that you need to understand and be aware of, because what happens a lot of times is when you are working with a realtor, and especially if it's your first time you've sold a house, it's kind of overwhelming. There's a lot of paperwork, a lot of different documents you're going to be asked to sign. You may not have time to read through them all carefully, and I would encourage you to do that. But nevertheless, this is kind of to give you a primer of what you should expect. So let's jump right into this now. The first form is the listing agreement. So this is the agreement that says that you agree to work with this realtor with this particular brokerage to sell your property. So the form that I'm going to review in this video is the one that we use at Coldwell Banker Realty in Southeast Florida. Now, the form that you're going to see is going to be very similar to this, maybe slightly different, but the gist is going to be the same. So let's jump right in. All right, so you list your name, and then we describe the property. That's the regular address that you're used to seeing, and then this is important, the legal description. Ask your realtor to make sure that that's filled in properly. That's usually available on the local municipality's tax collector's website or property appraiser's website, something like that. So the realtor should be able to take care of that for you. The occupancy of the property, if it's your primary residence, you live there, of course it's going to be occupied by you. If it's vacant, that's great. Or if it is leased, if it's an investment property and you have tenants there, specify that it's leased, and also when the lease will end, or when it will be, by when will it be vacant. The term refers to the term of this listing agreement, so the length of time that you are going to have this agreement in place. So beginning on typically the date you're signing, or if you guys agree to list in a few days, whatever day you want to actually list the property, and ending on whenever the agreement will expire. This form defaults to 1 year if left blank, but that's kind of a lot to ask somebody to lock themselves into a 1 year agreement. So I usually default this to 6 months. I will put 6 months in here. That's typically a reasonable amount of time to get most properties sold. Now, if it's an extremely unique property or a super high-end property, it may take longer. Talk to your realtor about that. You guys can come to a term that you both agree on. Of course, the list price. What do you want to actually sell the house for, or list the house for? So your realtor should have prepared a comparative market analysis for you to help you understand what similar properties have sold for on a square footage basis and what the comps look like. So you guys will work together to come up with a reasonable list price, which will be listed here. Now, the financing options section is important because it has implications for the process later in the transaction as you work through the sale towards closing. So, obviously, cash is what you want. If you're selling your house, you want an all-cash offer. That's the ideal situation because there's just a lot fewer contingencies and it's typically much faster. So, yeah, you're probably going to go ahead and accept cash. And conventional financing is what you're going to uncover and what you're going to encounter most of the time. This is your standard loan. It used to be historically that these were 20% down, but nowadays you can get a conventional loan for a smaller amount down. But this is the standard 15 or 30-year mortgage that most people are going to get. Now, if it's a veteran, the VA loan option, and let me just talk about VA and FHA together. So if you're going to be accepting these financing options as a seller, just be aware that the criteria for these to get approved for these loans is a little bit more stringent. So what that means is that sometimes it takes the buyer a little bit longer to get approved. It's perhaps possible that the VA and or FHA loans could have a little longer time to closing. They may not be quite as efficient in getting to closing. So typically you're not going to have an issue, but just be aware it might be a little longer, and it is possibly a few more spots for hangups in the closing process. So talk to your realtor about that, and make sure you understand what the implications of accepting VA and FHA financing are. I'm not really going to talk about seller financing. This is pretty uncommon. If you're going to basically offer a mortgage to the buyer, if you want to get into that, talk to your mortgage lender and or your realtor about this. Assumable mortgage, also not going to spend time talking about this, but this is if the mortgage that you already have on your property can be transferred to a new buyer. Pretty uncommon, so if that's your situation, you can talk to your realtor about it. Now, of course, the listing agreement says that we're going to advertise your property. That's kind of the point. So this paragraph is interesting, and I actually disagree with some other realtors on this. So this clause basically says that you allow, you want to have us advertise your property in a variety of media, online and print, whatever. But this other section here says that you opt out of blogging. Yes or no? Do you opt out? And opt out of the automated estimated valuation feature, yes or no? So that's basically like on Zillow, the Zestimate, it says your house is worth, and they give you an estimate. That's the automated estimated valuation feature. Now, some people say, yes, you should opt out of that because it's not completely accurate. I agree, it's not completely accurate, but my view is that the more information we can get out into the public realm about the property, the better, period, because it just gets more eyes on the property. I mean, at the end of the day, if somebody comes and buys the property, that's what we want to happen. So the more eyes that get on the property, the more likelihood that there's going to be a buyer eventually come through with an offer. So I would say go ahead for the automated valuations. And then blogging is basically, for me as the realtor, it's probably, I guess theoretically, better if you do opt out of this because it allows me to have, to do all the advertising. It's focused through me. But I think that's sort of ridiculous. Like I said earlier, I want you to have maximum exposure to the public with your property. So I would say, you do not opt out of this. Let other people write about it. If they find a buyer and they bring them to your house, that's great. The goal is to get your house sold. So that's how I feel about that. But, your realtor may have some different perspectives on that, but that's basically what it means. Also here, that note that this is the part of the listing agreement that says you allow us to put a lockbox on your house. And, you can talk to the realtor about that if you really don't want to do that. It's not mandatory. You can, work something out with showings. But you do have the option, at least in this listing agreement form, to allow your realtor to withhold verbal offers. I do not suggest that you do that because as the seller of the home, you want to get all of the feedback possible. You want to understand everything as far as the information that the realtor is getting about how the process is going. So if I get an offer from a potential buyer that is kind of in passing and they just say, hey, verbally, hey, I'd like to buy that house for $300,000. I'll say, okay, if you're serious, go ahead and send over a written offer. But I would still tell you as the seller, I'll text you or call you and say, hey, somebody's interested. It was a top line offer, verbal only for $300,000. Let's see if he actually submits an offer. I want you to be aware, but if you do opt out of this, if you're extra busy or if it's just maybe like an investment property and part of a business or something, and you don't want to be bothered with anything unless it's a formal offer, you do have the option to opt out. So the next section covers what your obligations are as the seller. Basically what this says is that you're going to be honest about everything you know about the property. You're going to cooperate with us as far as what we need to do to try to sell the property. You're not going to bar the photographer from entering the property when he comes and that kind of stuff. And, you're going to do your best to make sure that your property is in alignment with, local laws and there's no unusual situations with your property that you are trying to hide or not disclose, something like that. Next section is compensation. This is, of course, the most heavily discussed issue surrounding the sale of your home. A lot of concern about how much you pay on your realtor. Where does that money go? How much are you actually going to spend? Well, this is the document, excuse me, in which you negotiate this, in which you figure this out. And it's very important to keep in mind that these fees are negotiable. There's kind of floors under the as low as most realtors will go, depending on the local market. It's highly market driven. So this form, for example, here in Southeast Florida, defaults to 7% if you don't fill this out. I think that's too high personally. I don't ask any clients for 7%. Typically 6% is standard. That's usually what we use, 6%. And there is an additional line here you need to be aware of, at least in this form, and other brokerages will do something similar. In addition to the 6%, there's a $345 fee that is basically administrative costs. That goes directly to the brokerage. I, as a realtor, don't get any of that. That is just for kind of admin back end stuff. So just be aware to look for that in whatever listing agreement you are signing. It may not be just the percentage that you're paying. There may be something else there. So in this section, later on, we will also cover how are we going to use the commission. So basically, the commission is split. So if we enter into a listing agreement and you say, okay, I'll give you 6%, what I'm going to do is take that and I'll keep 3% of it. Out of that 3%, I pay the brokerage, typically 25 to 40%, depending on what sort of agreement the realtor has with the brokerage. And then I also, out of that money, will pay for all the marketing. I'll pay for all the professional photography, print flyers, signs, everything else we need to sell the house, any other social media campaigns, I pay for that. So the commission doesn't all go to me. A lot of times people think, oh, you're going to get, thousands and thousands of dollars. Not really. Realtors don't make as much on each transaction as people sometimes think they do. So what we do is specify here how much of the commission we're going to give to the buyer's agent. So I will say, it's always 50-50 as far as I'm concerned. I say to the other agents out there, look, if you bring a buyer, you get half this commission. And that's a key part of the incentive to have other realtors bring buyers to get your house sold. That's kind of the function of the commission. So there's another clause in here that I'm personally not a fan of this, but it's situation dependent. Just make sure you understand it and talk to your realtor about it. It says that if you enter into a lease while we're within the term of this listing agreement, that you'll pay a percentage to the broker. So this form defaults to 10%. Typically I leave this blank unless, I don't know, maybe there's some sort of a unique situation. You should talk to your realtor about that and make sure you have a plan for what's going to happen if you decide to go ahead and move out early and it's sitting there empty and you want somebody to maybe rent it month to month. The realtor or brokerage will probably ask for a portion of that. But talk to your realtor about that. Escrow, depending on the brokerage that you're using, they may offer to hold the escrow for the buyer. In this particular form, this is just saying that if we, as Coldwell Banker Realty, are going to hold the escrow for you, for the buyer, it's an insured account. It's kind of just an FYI there. But typically, at least in my market in South Florida, the buyer selects the title company, and they will present the offer with details about, okay, we're going to offer this price and here's the title company we're going to use and they're going to hold the escrow. That's just kind of how it works here. In other markets, sometimes the seller actually will be the one to select the title company, but talk to your realtor about that. This is just a general FYI clause in here, kind of about be careful, don't do anything dumb. Surprisingly, real estate transactions have an unfortunately very surprisingly high portion of transactions that have fraud involved or some problems, because there's a lot of big amounts of money being wired around to several different parties. Sometimes it goes perhaps from the buyer to an escrow agent to maybe a closing agent and then dispersed to the respective parties at the end of the sale. So sometimes what will happen is that nefarious parties will become aware of the transaction and they'll find the buyer's email address and send them an official looking email that says, okay, here's the account number, wire your money to this account. And then the next thing you know, the buyer never hears from that person again, and the money's gone. So the point is, be very careful. As the seller, this is not as critical, but if you're buying, or really anything related to the amount of money that moves around for real estate transactions, just be extra careful. Read everything carefully. Verify any information with phone calls that you receive in an email that doesn't look quite right. Just stay on top of things. There is a clause in here about, for example, my brokerage, we have a variety of businesses we affiliate with and partner with, and we can suggest those as maybe they can do some part of the transaction. You don't have to use them, and it's bolded here. The final choice is yours. So when you sign a listing agreement with a brokerage, you're not, unless it's a very different form than I've ever seen, you're not signing that says you will do, in addition to agreeing to have that particular brokerage sell your house, you're not agreeing that you're going to, be pinned down on any other business for any other aspect of the transaction. So that additional choice for any other parts of the transaction is up to you. Obviously, dangerous pets and animals. If you got an aggressive dog, really, if you got any dog at all, put it away during showings. You can't, this is common sense. Insurance, talk to your homeowner. If you're going to sell your house, make sure you give your insurance a call and say, I'm going to sell the house. We're maybe going to move out. It's going to be vacant. What do we need to do to make sure that there's the appropriate level of coverage for, if there's showings or whatever. Just be on top of that. Audio and video recording devices, at least here in Florida and probably in other markets as well, we have to if you have if you have something like security cameras on the property, you have to, and you can't turn them completely off, audio and video off. If that's the case, you have to disclose to the realtor when you sign the listing agreement and clarify where they are and what's going on, because we have to disclose if we're bringing somebody to a showing that you could be recorded. We just don't want to have legal situations in the future where somebody says, "Oh, I was on your security camera, but I didn't authorize being recorded." So that's there primarily for legal protection later, and just be aware of that. Automatic extension. This just says that if the termination date we agreed to falls, once we're under contract, you get an offer from a buyer and we're under contract and we say, okay, we got 45 days till closing, for example. If this term expires during that pending process, it automatically extends until closing, because you don't want to have a relationship with the brokerage that is no longer valid while you're still under contract for the process to be closed. So that's what that is about. So this basically says, if you sign this, you agree to pay us a commission, a certain percentage commission, and then we get this property sold and you're like, you know what, I'm not paying you. That's obviously going to be a legal problem. So the brokerage, and all brokerages do this. I've never had any experience with it getting to this point, but we do have the option to put a lien on the property for the commission amount if it's not being paid. This next clause says that the local laws will kind of guide any disputes. If anything happens and we need to get litigation or the court system involved, the local ordinances and laws will control that situation. If you want to relocate, if you're moving to another state or something, just let your realtor know. Most likely whatever brokerage you're working with will have agents in that area too, and they can hook you up with somebody who can help you find a new place. The rest of this stuff is pretty minor. Additional terms, if you wanted to do some sort of additional term that wasn't specified elsewhere in this agreement, like let's say that you wanted to incentivize the broker to try to sell the property extra fast. Let's say, look, I'll give you 6% if you sell it within 6 months, but if you sell it within 15 days, I'll give you 7%, something like that. You could put those terms in here, or anything else that is not covered elsewhere in this contract, in this agreement. So importantly, this just clarifies that this is a binding agreement, and it's a legal document, so just be aware of what you're signing and that you're committing to working with that particular brokerage. And that's basically it. So the listing agreement, we've covered that. Ask your realtor to clarify what sort of brokerage relationship you're establishing when you sign this. In my market, it's always a transaction brokerage relationships, meaning that we as the brokerage and myself as the realtor are our loyalty is to the deal. We are representing the deal. We want to get the deal done. In some other markets, it may be more typical to have a single agent. So like I would be functioning as your exclusive agent. In some situations, and it's best to avoid this, you can get into a situation of dual agency. It's actually illegal here in South Florida, so we don't ever deal with that. But that's a situation where I would be your agent, in theory, acting on your behalf and your best interest, but also trying to do the same for a buyer. That's not a great situation. So in most cases, the realtor is doing the best that they can to make sure everybody is happy and the deal goes smoothly and everybody gets what they want. So we're focused on the deal. Our allegiance is to the deal. That's what that kind of brokerage relationship means. But anyway, so that's the listing agreement. Like I said, yours will look slightly different, but this is a critically important document whenever you list a property with a realtor. So make sure you look it over carefully, and I'll see you guys in the next video in the series.